We'll call the meeting to order pursuant to Standing Order 1082, study of the subject matter interim estimates, year 2018-19, votes 1 and 5 under the Canada Revenue Agency. And we have from CRA with us today Ms. Ramcharan, who's the Financial Officer and Assistant Commissioner. Mr. Gallivan, Assistant Commissioner, International Large Business and Investigations Branch, and Mr. Vermatten, Assistant Commissioner, Assessment Benefits and Services Branch. And I wonder, before we start, we do know there is going to be bells about 4:40 for a vote, 30-minute bells. With the vote at 5:10, would we be okay to go to 5 o'clock and then suspend for the for the vote? And so this group would be complete at 5. Agreed? Okay. All right. The floor is yours, Ms. Ramcharan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee to present Canada Revenue Agency's interim estimates for 2018 and 2019, and to answer any questions that you may have on the associated funding.
As you are aware, the CRA is responsible for the administration of federal and certain provincial and territorial tax programs, as well as the delivery of a number of benefit payment programs. Each year, the agency collects hundreds of billions of dollars in tax revenue for the governments of Canada and distributes timely and accurate benefit payments to millions of Canadians.
2019 fiscal year, the CRA is seeking a total of $822 million through these interim estimates. This represents the funding required to cover expected payments that will occur in the first quarter of the fiscal year for ongoing operations. The amount would historically be included as part of the main estimates of interim supply bill. The funding is being requested as part of the interim estimates is roughly 1/4 of the voted appropriations that will be sought by the CRA through the 2018-2019 main estimates. It does not reflect incremental resources for announcements made by the Minister of Finance in the February 2018 budget. The funding required for the implementation and administration of these measures is currently being evaluated by the CRA and will be presented to the Treasury Board ministers through formal submissions in the coming months.
The resources being requested through these estimates will allow the CRA to continue to deliver on its mandate to Canadians by making it easier for the vast majority of taxpayers who want to pay their taxes and more difficult for the small minority who do not, as well as ensuring that Canadians have ready access to the information they need about taxes or benefits.
As funding supports, Mr. Chair, let me touch on some service improvements the CRA introduced last year. At the beginning of the year, the 2017 T1 tax forms and guide was mailed directly to the homes of Canadians who filed paper returns in 2016. People no longer need to pick up guides and forms to fulfill their tax obligations at service centres, which is helpful for people with mobility problems or who live in remote areas. Also, in January 2018, the CRA launched an automated phone system called File My Return. This phone system helps more than 950,000 Canadians, particularly those with low income or fixed income. After identifying themselves on the phone systems, the users will then answer a series of short questions, and their income tax returns will be filed. For people using the system, there is no need to fill out forms or make complicated calculations. The CRA continues to promote another Canada-wide program called the Community Volunteer Income Tax Program and a Quebec component called the Volunteer Program. Through these programs, trained volunteers help people file their income tax returns and receive benefits and credits for which they're entitled. These free clinics serve people with low income and simple tax situations, including seniors, students, Indigenous people, newcomers, and people with disabilities. These programs help ensure Canadians receive what they are entitled to in ways that are respectful and meet the needs of individuals, while at the same time helping people meet the obligations of the Income Tax Act. Mr. Chair, at this time, we would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. very much, and we'll turn to Mr. Greywall, and we'll go to 5-minute rounds due to the tightened time frame. Mr. Greywall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I think when you're in the constituency for members of Parliament, I would say unequivocally that the most difficult department to deal with is the CRA. And obviously the Auditor General had some not nice things to say about you guys in the last report. What's being done to ensure that customer service is of the utmost importance at the CRA?
Thank you very much. We take customer service very strongly to heart, and we're doing a range of things to try to improve services, try to improve those services. My colleague Cami talked about some of the things that we're already doing. For example, this year the distribution of the forms to make sure people get the tax forms, don't have to go to Canada Post or to bank to get those. We've introduced a whole range of services, digital services, to make it easier for people to fill out their own taxes. File My Return, as Cami mentioned, really makes it easier, particularly for low-income people, to be able to file their taxes when they have a simple tax situation. They can do that over the telephone. So I think that's a real significant improvement for some. It's not going to be for everyone, but certainly for some. But we're doing a whole range of things. I think we have a very solid action plan on the phone services, and I think we've seen some very strong results early in the filing season. So the improvements that we've put in place are really making it easier for Canadians to reach a call agent. And so I think those are some of the things that we're doing. Happy to elaborate further on any of those or other issues.
Like, I don't want to bring up specific examples, but I mean, since I've been a member of Parliament for the last 2.5 years, anytime we've had to deal with the CRA, it's been extremely frustrating because the interpretation is so strict to the letter of the law. Even if it's like common sense would dictate, like, you know, the resource being spent fighting this doesn't make any sense. For example, a company is behind on its HST. You guys freeze their accounts, right? Which allows them not to pay their employees, which allows them not to conduct business. So basically, you want them to pay, but you also won't allow them to conduct their business. So logically speaking, it'd be like the good faith of, okay, we'll pay you $1,000 every week. Please let us continue our business so we can make revenue, pay you, and work with the CRA to get to this balance. But it seems like an over harsh interpretation. Pay the $500,000 you owe, or we're not going to unfreeze your accounts. Like, to me, that doesn't make any sense. And just, I would love your insight on why it's such a strict interpretation by some of your officers at the CRA when it's small businesses that aren't overly wealthy, that are employing Canadians, that, you know, sometimes because of bad accounting advice, bad legal advice, fall behind on their payments. They recognize that they got to pay it, and they're looking for a payment plan.
Yeah, to address the question, I mean, there's no doubt that collection situations can be tense, and the employees have all kinds of training in terms of communication skills and soft skills, but it can be difficult for the taxpayer. Our collection approach is founded on communication and adaptability. We actively encourage payment arrangements. In some of the most difficult situations for taxpayers is when there's a lack of responsiveness and a lack of communication. So what can happen is the taxpayer just doesn't respond because they don't have the money and there's no engagement. That can be a route to getting your bank account frozen. And then, you know, the CRA might ask for substantiation. In other words, if we're entering into a payment arrangement, we might ask to see financial statements so we can determine what a reasonable rate of repayment is. And again, taxpayers can be reluctant to provide that information. I think transparency is important. To help regain Canadians' trust, the CRA is working very hard to be more transparent. And under that theme, all of our collections policies are up on the internet. Like, they're disclosed for taxpayers and representatives or family friends or whoever's helping the small business. And so I think we have a commitment to be reasonable and to engage in payment arrangements. That's a key part of our collections approach. And I think we also, more importantly, have a commitment to be transparent. And all of the policies we follow are out there. And if the CRA collector isn't adhering to it, well, it's there on the internet site for you to call us on it.
Thank you. My last question is obviously, all Canadians across this country, from coast to coast to coast, work really hard, whether that are they business owners, entrepreneurs, or they're working for a Fortune 500 or a smaller company or manufacturing company. They all pay their fair share of tax. And our government's committed to ensuring that Canadians, no matter what your tax portfolio looks like, pay your fair share. The question of tax evasion and tax avoidance has been coming up a lot, not just in Canada, but around the world. There's been significant investments since our government came into office into ensuring that Canadians, especially multinational corporations, are paying their fair share. How have these investments paid off in the last 2.5 years?
I'll talk quickly at 3 levels. At the first level, which is ultimately people paying voluntarily in the first place, I'll look back to last fall's fiscal monitor. In the November report, they showed multinationals paid 7.5% more tax in the 6 months ending November 2017 than they did previously. Now, the economy grew at 3%. So they 4.5% more corporate tax than the economy or economic growth would seem to suggest. Non-residents paid roughly 20% more tax than the similar period. So I think strategically there's some sense that the people that we're targeting are getting the message and they're starting to do the right thing. At the second level, kind of the audit yield, what we identified through audit, there was an expectation that we'd find $380 million in fiscal 16-17. We found $500 million. This fiscal year, that's going to close in a couple of weeks, we expected 1.1 and just over $1.1 billion. We had hit that by the third quarter. So in terms of the revenue generation, the immediate revenue generation, we expect that to be exceeded again this fiscal year. But in terms of the right taxpayers, that's where we talk about people with offshore. And we talk about 40 criminal investigations in terms of offshore and over 1,000 audits of individuals who had money offshore. Now, we have been talking about audits and not results yet because those are complicated audits. We have taxpayers who are refusing to be audited. We have a number of cases before the courts where the taxpayers aren't cooperating with us. And so it will be a number of years for those criminal investigations to be finalized and the audits to be finalized. But I would say at the level of kind of strategic voluntary payment, the revenue generation we committed to, and the target action on offshore, we do have a track record of results.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. And Mr. Gelman, I'd like to carry on with something you just mentioned there. So you said you had a target to find $360 million through audit, and you found 560. Did I get that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Of that 560 in tax finding, how much has been collected?
So of the $500 million, we don't have an exact calculation. What I can tell you is last fiscal year, our collections program collected 96.7% of all funds that were outstanding. So they closed 96.7%. The challenge we have, so we don't have an exact number, and the reason we don't have an exact calculation is because many of these taxpayers owe us debt for multiple years on multiple accounts, and they don't pay it off all at once. So you have a multiple of debts and a multiple of payments. We are committed to providing an estimate. This is a question that's been asked in the media and been asked by parliamentarians, and the agency is now working on an estimate. So I hope the next time we're here, or shortly thereafter, we'll be able to give you a percentage estimate of what we've collected, because it's very difficult to give you.
I look forward to that. And clearing a file is not the same as collecting either. And that's an important distinction because writing off a file as uncollectible or as one that would likely not survive the objection process is another way to clear a file. So finding tax is one thing, collecting the actual money is something else.
Your point is very well taken. I will make a point with respect to litigation, though. Some of these tax professionals are very creative. And some of our work in the CRA is policing the acceptable limits of tax planning. And sometimes we need to litigate and even lose to establish that the law needs to be clarified. And that's why we work very closely with the Department of Finance with respect to closing tax loopholes. So I think I would just caution that sometimes when the CRA identifies an amount and we lose in tax court, it ends up leading to the right thing, which is a legislative change which closes the loophole and stops the tax leakage.
Okay.
The bells are ringing, which is way earlier than expected. It's a 30-minute bell. Are we okay to go? Do we have unanimous consent to go till 10 minutes short of voting time? Agreed? Okay. Go ahead, Pat. You've got lots of time left.
Okay. what is the general trend line on the time with which it takes to see for a notice of objection to go through the CRA appeal process for small businesses, for corporate tax filers, small business corporate tax filers?
We're going to have, so my colleague who has carriage of that file has briefed recently that there's been progress since the OEG was here. The action plan that the CRA set up in the wake of the OEG audit is coming across, but I don't have the exact number today.
Okay. I've spoken to tax preparers across Canada, and the number that seems to keep coming up is about 18 months. And I'm curious as to whether that's getting better or worse, and if you have the ability to determine the exact number. On the disability tax credit, do you know what the current time frame, this is probably a question for Mr. Grattan, what's the current time to have a disability tax credit application assessed?
Currently takes between 6 and 8 weeks.
Sorry, we're down to?
Between 6 to 8 weeks.
6 to 8 weeks. There was a clarification letter was reverted back to the earlier one before May 2nd. Have all of those assessments been done, or what is the backlog currently?
The large majority of those have been done. There's only a handful where we're still waiting for the reply from the medical practitioner. So we have undertaken that review.
How many of them were there?
A little over 2,200. I think 2,267.
Okay. How many were reversed on re-examination?
Well, we haven't got finalized results, and we'd like to run those by the Disability Advisory Committee. So we plan to do that the next meeting, have them look at it, and then make that information public. What I can tell you is that when you look at the acceptance rate pre-May 2017 versus post-May 2017, after we've done the review, the acceptance rates are virtually identical. So I believe the review has been very successful.
So you have the data, but you're not prepared to share it with this committee?
We haven't finalized the data, so I'd like to finalize the data because we put in, if we release preliminary data and still waiting for some, then that's going to create confusion when we release the final ones.
Not quite complete then?
It's not quite complete.
The reassessment.
We're waiting for a handful of them where we've sent letters to the medical practitioners where we're trying to get some additional information.
Okay. Then quickly on audit, one of the concerns that has been raised with me from professional tax preparers across Canada is the issue of quality of audits. And I've heard this from different regions of the country, from all kinds of different preparers, some who even identify as strident supporters of the governing party. And they tell me that the quality of audit is deteriorating and that this is causing the backlog in appeals, and that the comment from one accountant was, I've had more audits of my own clients in the last year than the previous 30 years combined, and they're almost all of them, the agency is wrong in a matter of law and a matter of fact, and it's a question of then having to go through the appeal, which takes a long time and is extremely upsetting to the taxpayer. These types of criticism, what would you say in comment on that?
I think I'll go to the crux of the matter, which is the difference between an accounting opinion, a legal opinion, and a litigation opinion. And the agency, particularly in the branch that I lead, is working to get litigation eyes on files before we issue proposal letters to taxpayers. So I think there is some truth that a legal opinion isn't the same as a litigation opinion. And with the multinationals and the high work,
accountants are complaining about, in many cases, fairly routine stuff.
So in that area, we have implemented a standardized national quality assurance process where all audits are subject to quality review, and we have a fairly high rate of quality review. For new auditors, it nears 100%. For experienced auditors, they're at 20 or 30%, and that is real-time quality assurance. This does take place before we reassess a taxpayer. And so there are quality controls built in. I think it is true we have some issues with respect to litigation and the difference of evidence, but our statistics in terms of change rates and appeal rates don't show an upward trend with respect to small business and medium business and eroding quality.
Okay, thank you.
Glad to leave it there. We're well over. Mr. Dussault.
Merci. J'aimerais pour ma première question.
Thank you. My first question will be somewhat technical in nature about the interim estimates report. 832 million, but in the credit number 1, there is an authorization up to 3,576 million and some odd dollars. So I would like to know which of these two amounts we will actually be voting on. Is it the 822 million or the 3,565,865?
Interim estimates, which is the 822 million, which represents roughly 1/4 of our needs. We will come back at a date. I think it's in mid-April when the main estimates are tabled, and that's when we'll be able to talk about the broader envelope that we have for the agency.
OK. Bon, c'est bon à savoir. Pourtant, ça dit autorisation.
To know, but nevertheless, we see here up to 3,500,000, so not exceeding 3,565,000 or some. So I'll take you on your word then. 3 billion. So, as to the figures that you're now circulating, you may be aware of a response to question put by my colleague. Mr. Caron, is a criminal investigation program. Between 2010 until today, there has been a reduction, basically, in the last years anyway, a lesser budget for criminal investigations. Also, fewer full-time positions for that programming. Same time, the minister keeps telling us that efforts are underway and are even being increased, and we're doing better and better in that domain. So how is it that criminal investigations has undergone so many cuts in the last few years? Well, I would say it's not really funding cuts. The budget per se in amounts is stable, but what has happened is that the agency did make a strategic choice in 2013 to reduce the numbers of offices, but to work on very sophisticated approaches, overseas approaches, and high-quality practitioners rather than just going for, your corner store and just small-scale issues, but to really focus on very serious matters. So that required some auditors who cost more because they were more competent, had more experience. So given the same budget, we were able to hire a fewer number of auditors, but people with a great deal of experience. The same decision, the same strategic choice also explains the fact that we are covering fewer cases now. We went from 1 to 2 overseas files to 40 files now being investigated, and these files are more complex. We assign more auditors to them. There's a lot of international communication around them, and we chose that criminal investigations would cover fewer cases with more sophisticated auditors using more sophisticated approaches. That doesn't mean that we're abandoning other areas, but it simply means that we're really targeting a certain area, the civil approach. Civil, you mean? Well, let's say that you've got a dépanneur, a small corner store that's selling lottery cards and not paying taxes on them. We'll certainly ask them to pay their taxes, but we won't take them to court over it. We'll take people who have a more sophisticated criminal activity to court for non-compliance. Very well. Picking up on something that was said a little earlier about the figures, what amounts can be recovered, what you're able to collect, really. In 2018, your aims are 184 million to be recovered. That's the aim, at least, for 2018 and 17. So less than 25 billion. I think you will all remember the amount the minister talking about 25 billion that had been earmarked, had been identified, and that supposedly was going to be collected, but it doesn't look like we're anywhere near that, are we? Even in the figures you spoke of earlier, 360 million last year, heading for 500 million, 1.1 billion this year, ending on the March 31st, and perhaps even more than that. That's still not 25 billion, so I can't see how it is that the minister continues to tout this $25 billion figure. So can you just break that down for us, the 25 billion? What does it represent? What is it? And when are we going to be seeing it in our coffers? Before our recent investments, we always had, of course, a basic program up and running, auditors. So when the minister speaks of 12.5 a year and 25 billion over 2 years, that's the overall programming, basic resources, and the resources that have been set in 2017, 2018. So 12.5 billion a year, 25 billion, that is our overall undertakings, including past resources and current resources. So 500 million a year, 1.1 billion a year. That's additional amounts, supplementary resources, they have contributed to the total result. Okay, so that's supplementary.
Mr. Sabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we can get one on from each side, Francesco.
This week, last week, my constituency office held one voluntary tax clinic for constituents, and great to say that I think we did 65 tax returns for individuals under a certain income. So, how widely has that been adopted in not even just MPs' offices, but across the country? Because I think it's actually a fabulous program for many folks who maybe don't want to do the touchtone dial. And what resources are being put into that place? Because the feedback we got was phenomenal from a lot of these individuals that came into the office.
Well, that's great to hear you're having some success. I think the CVIT program is a very popular program, and it's really been increasing over the last several years. The amount of, we particularly welcome the resources in Budget 2018, so that allowed us again to double the size of the resources, and that in turn will really increase the kind of support we can give to volunteers across the country. And our goal is within the next 5 years to really double the size of that program. So we've got hundreds of thousands of people that are using that program, and as you know, it's for low-income people, low-income families, usually in fairly simple tax situations, but they're the kind of people that often need personalized help, and I think the program is really doing that, so we're pretty proud of that.
It is an excellent program. I'm actually happy to announce we're doing another 3 days of it. I think we have another 60-odd folks coming in to have to receive assistance via their taxes. I think that's one of those kind of good news stories that you don't hear reported about CRA, and you don't hear that we're putting the funds in and making the proper investments for CRA to do that, which is something I think we should be applauded for. In terms of, you brought up a number of 1.1 billion. My understanding that there was a target of $1 billion, and we've surpassed that through 3/4 of the year. Can you just clarify that and provide minor details?
So the expectation was to identify 1.1 billion in additional tax owing, and we had met that as of December 31st or the third quarter. So we're quite confident of exceeding that.
And would you say a part and parcel of that ability to collect those revenues that would be obviously put into the programs that we cherish was the providing the proper resources to CRA over the last number of years to undertake that?
Yes, and I think I would also emphasize back to the question about tracking the exact dollars that are collected. The deterrent impact of that increased effort is likely one of the factors that's influencing the 7.5% increase in corporate tax. You know, on an annualized basis, that represents roughly $10 billion in additional tax. And so if you look at personal income tax, non-residence tax, corporate tax, they're all up well above GDP growth. Now, the tax agency can't take credit for all of that, but there's a positive upward trend. And so it's true, we understand that if you give us $1, we'll generate a certain dollar in billings. But how we spend that and how we target it is also very important. The OECD is doing work around country-by-country reporting and CRS. These are two global efforts to get greater transparency for multinationals and individuals, and we're seeing a global lift from both of those two segments ahead of those measures. These are sophisticated people, and they're starting to pay the tax they owe in the first instance.
Okay. Just very short, just to make sure that in terms of customer service, because we have a lot of small businesses in Canada and a lot of small businesses in the area I represent in the region, that what controls the CR have in place that we don't become overzealous, if I can use that terms of auditors or tax collectors, just auditing the mom and pop business and the riding, but actually helping them with their compliance and not going in there with a different sort of attitude.
So first, the resources that we've received have been targeted. A lot of the money included business intelligence IT systems to target the highest risk. And for us, highest risk correlates with dollars. And so if you look at the $12.5 billion annual overall result, 2/3 are coming from ultra high net worth individuals and multinationals. And so we disproportionately cover people with large dollars. In terms of the rest of the taxpayers, the assignment of the file is done by somebody different than the person who actually conducts the audit. So there's an expert there who understands that there's risk, that we're not wasting the taxpayers' time, we're not wasting our time. There are written procedures and guidance that are in there. There are supervisory reviews at various steps in the audit process. Then there is an IT system that causes regional quality assurance to take place. And then there's a headquarters level above that. And then back to the appeals process. One of the key recommendations or action plans from the agency around the appeal situation is to close the feedback loop. And so we get regular reports in the audit function from the appeals function saying it's this office or that taxpayer or that situation that you seem to be getting wrong because we're reversing it. And so that's one of the outcomes of the OAG review is to tighten that feedback loop.
We'll have to cut you there, Mr. Albas.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for each one of our witnesses for the work you do for Canadians. What I would like to do, though, is just briefly ask in the interim estimates or any of the documents that are here today, are there any increased monies to review the excise stamp that's used for tobacco?
It'd be very hard to pick out a piece of the program associated with that, but that's not money that we've received additional. So if we have any efforts underway right now that's been ongoing for a number of years, it would be no different. So it's not money that we would have received additional. Okay, because
at a different committee, I did ask the Minister of Health whether or not she's raised concerns about the stamp with the Minister of National Revenue, because that's an area I think that our own committee, we've heard that those stamps are actually being used on contraband tobacco baggies, and I think that if CRA is serious about tackling that issue and fulfilling their functions given to them under law, that there should be a review of that program. Second, just in regards to Mr. Kelly's questions in regards to audits and obviously to appeals, it's my understanding that CRA has sought to or already has boosted their audit function by about 50%. Is that correct?
Did you say 50%?
Yes.
No.
Of the auditors you had previously, there was a marked increase, though, the amount of auditors you were. So either you're attempting to hire or you've already hired them.
50%, even for an individual program, seems to be very, very high. Even in the coverage of multinationals, for example, we have roughly 2,200 employees. We've hired 150 additional, but that doesn't get anywhere near 50%. So,
okay, the member must have been a specific department. Was there a department that specifically saw a large uptake recently?
The most significant uptakes have been in offshore. So in the offshore area since 2007, when we really didn't have an offshore area, that's grown dramatically. So individuals with money in countries that are typically seen as tax havens, that has seen dramatic growth.
Okay. So again, are those experienced auditors you're bringing in from other positions, from other parts of the agency, or are these new positions completely, and they'll be staffed by new hires?
The vast majority are being staffed from people who did small and medium enterprises. They move up and so they graduate. We have attempted external hiring because we're very open to bringing in professionals mid-career, but we have not been terribly successful. So I would say the vast majority, 80–90% plus, have been internal promotions, but we remain open to bringing in talented people from outside. We just haven't had a lot of success recently.
So in specific to offshore, the government, Prime Minister as well as the Minister of National Revenue has been quite boastful about looking to, I think, recoup about $11 billion. Do you know what the current target for the CRA is in this year as far as offshore? And I'd like to know if it's realistic given the issues you've had with hiring and staffing.
So we haven't had issues with staffing. We've been able to staff all of the positions. The ratio from external to internal hasn't been as biased towards external as we might have hoped, because I think we're open. We exceeded the first year target. That was the $380 million. We've identified $500 million. This year, it's $1.1 billion. We were at $1.1 billion by Q3. And so the progress to date would suggest that we are selecting the right files and we have the auditors in place to issue those assessments.
To leave it there, thank you all. I just got one quick point I want to make, and I think we all in our MP's office, we have lots of constituents come to us with their concerns in CRA, and by the time they get to us, they're at their wits' end. And one thing I will admit, as far as the problem resolution people we deal with CRA through our office, can't say enough good things about them. But what seems to be a problem increasingly is lost information. I mean, I've constituents that have sent information in 3 times, and that's not unusual. So just look into that. I mean, you know, when it's sent in, it should be somewhere, but I've seen constituents send the same information weeks apart 3 times. So there's something, and I would expect everybody around the table probably has similar problems, and there's a glitch somewhere. With that, thank you sorry to rush you. With that, thank you very much for your information, and we will reconvene after the vote with the Minister of Finance. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned. The meeting and this session pursuant to Standing Order 1082. Committee will do a study of the subject matter of interim estimates 2018-19, votes 1 and 5 under the Department of Finance, vote 1 under Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, and vote 1 under the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. Welcome, Minister of Finance, Mr. Morneau. And I believe you have an opening statement, and we'll go from there. And welcome you as well, Deputy Minister Rocon. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss Budget 2018, equality and growth, a strong middle class, and to speak about the investments our government's making to keep Canada's economy strong. First, I'd like to thank the Standing Committee on Finance for its work in pre-budget consultations. Your work helped us to create a 2018 budget that takes further steps towards building an equal, competitive, sustainable, and fair Canada. I also want to thank the Canadians who took the time to submit their ideas to us in person and online. Nous devons faire et voulons faire du Canada un pays plus égalitaire.
We want to make of Canada a more fair country with a strong economy. This is necessary because Canada needs to draw on the work and the creativity of all Canadians to face the challenges of today and tomorrow. The government must ensure that Canadians across the country can take good advantage of the results of economic growth, which actually means that they should have well-paid jobs if they're in the middle class or if they're working hard to join the middle class. And that's exactly what 2018 budget attends to.
Respects the choice that Canadians made a little over 2 years ago, a confident and ambitious approach. That plan is working, thanks to the hard work of Canadians, combined with the government's historic investments in people and in communities. The Canadian economy created almost 600,000 jobs in the last 2 years, most of them full-time. The national unemployment rate is near its lowest level over the past 40 years. But while the Canadian economy is doing well, we know we still have more work to do. Through Budget 2018, the government's taking the next steps in its plan to grow and strengthen the middle class by promoting equality and investing in the economy of the future. Providing all Canadians with the opportunity to realize their full potential is the right thing and the smart thing to do for our economy. Budget 2018 introduces investments that will help make sure that everyone has an equal and fair chance at success. Simply put, when more people contribute to the economy is stronger. For example, the budget introduces the new Canada Workers Benefit, or CWB. This is an enhanced version of the Working Income Tax Benefit. This new program will benefit more people than the one it replaces and will put more money in the pockets of low-income workers. Moreover, the government will make it easier for people to access the benefit that they've earned. Starting next year, everyone who can benefit from the CWB will receive it when they file their taxes, even the tax filers who haven't claimed it. La nouvelle allocation canadienne pour les travailleurs apportera.
The Canada Workers Benefit will truly help over 2 million Canadians who are working hard to join the middle class, and will lift 60,000 Canadians out of poverty from now till 2020. As of next year, all taxpayers with the right to this benefit will receive it when they file their tax returns, whether they've requested it or not. And these measures will encourage more and more people to join the labor force, and this is very good for everyone. Budget 2018 also supports women's involvement in the workforce. This will support economic growth and be beneficial to all Canadians. Mr. Chair, the Mackenzie Institute measuring information about equality, such as the involvement of women and more childcare to allow women to join the workforce, has told us that Canada could add $150 billion to its economy between now and 2026.
Participation of women in the Canadian workforce could increase Canada's gross domestic product by 4%. Not 0.4%, but by 4%. Full and equal participation of women and men in Canada's economy is essential for our future. Mr. Chair, our economy cannot succeed when half of Canadians are held back. Le gouvernement fait preuve de leadership et proposera cette année.
The government is taking a leadership role on this by putting forward today a salary equality law this year to reduce the gender wage gap. We undertake to ensure that men and women receive equal pay for work of equal value.
The sharing benefit offers parents more flexibility. It adds additional weeks of leave, weeks of benefits when both parents share the parental leave. This use it or lose it incentive allows for more equity in parenting and more flexibility for parents, especially women, to decide when to return to work. The budget also takes further steps to ensure Canada and Indigenous peoples can forge a new relationship built on trust, respect, and cooperation. Budget 2018 will help close the gap between the living conditions of Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples, facilitate self-determination, and advance reconciliation of rights. With new investments included in the budget, several long-term drinking water advisories on public water systems on reserve will be lifted even earlier than originally forecast. But there's more. Through the budget, the government's investing in Indigenous peoples, removing barriers to their success, supporting their skills, and helping them fully participate in the economy and strengthen their communities. Monsieur le Président, les Canadiennes et les
Mr. Chair, Canadians feel the time has come to protect our environment, and the government is ready to back them. Budget 2018 it favors a green economy with low carbon footprint. The government wishes to ensure that carbon pollution is reduced by carbon taxes and pricing across Canada.
That's why, through Budget 2018, the government's making an historic investment of nearly $4 billion over 5 years in support of the next generation of Canadian research, providing increased support and training opportunities for about 21,000 researchers across Canada every year by 2021-2022. These investments will give our world-class scientists the support and the tools that they need for their important work that will help to drive our economy forward. Budget 2018 offers real progress for the middle class. As Canada's economy continues to grow, the government will ensure that all Canadians share in and benefit from this success. The budget's growth-generating investments, some of which I've outlined today, are being balanced by sound fiscal management that includes a declining debt-to-GDP ratio. The federal debt-to-GDP ratio, which is our debt relative to the size of our economy, is not only on a downward track, it's projected to be near its lowest level in nearly 40 years. Canada's net debt-to-GDP ratio is the lowest among all G7 countries, and the federal deficit-to-GDP ratio is on a downward track. It's projected to reach 0.5%. As a point of comparison, that of the United States federal government is currently at 3.5% and could reach about 5%. In other words, Canada's fiscal house is in order, which means that we're resilient to shocks and uncertainty in the economy. Les indicateurs montrent que la situation budgétaire.
Financial indicators show that Canada's financial state is solid. This means that the government can confidently go ahead investing in strengthening our country and strengthening the middle class. Budget 2018 will stimulate growth and productivity across Canada, and that's a good thing because tomorrow's jobs depend on Canadians' capacity to innovate today in a rapidly changing environment.
Canada's future and the things that truly matter to Canadians. And guided by a new gender results framework, it ensures that every Canadian has a real and fair chance at success. So, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer questions from members of the committee, either on Budget 2018 or on the Department of Finance interim estimates for 2018-2019. And we also have officials from the department in attendance if there's any very specific questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Minister. We will go to the first round 6 minutes. I think we can get everybody on if we go to the first round 6 minutes and the second round 5. So first up is Mr. Fergus.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, puis merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister. I greatly appreciate your being here, and I would like to thank you for having listened to the Finance Committee here. We find that many of the recommendations that we have put forward in investing in science, for example, international assistance, or simply putting out a budget that can truly be called a feminist budget, I'm sure, have been heard. So thank you for listening to us and listening to Canadians. I could give you an overview on this, but I would like to speak to a specific initiative that has been very important to people in my riding. In Elmer, as you know, we have many civil servants. And the people of Hull-Elmer felt that the prior government showed insufficient respect for the value of their work in the civil service. But, you know, what really topped it off was the Phoenix pay system. Having sent off all of the HR professionals before they brought in the Phoenix system and cut the ribbons, well, I was so pleased to see, and I'm certainly speaking for the people of my riding and likely for tens of thousands of people in the National Capital Region. So pleased then to be hearing that the government is now thinking of what will happen after Phoenix. Could you tell us a bit more about that in either French or English, Minister? You're quite right. The Phoenix pay system has been a serious challenge to us, and we have decided that it's of great importance to Canada to invest in this situation, to improve the situation.
Is one that considers the context that we found ourselves in when we came into office. I, in my private sector life, had been involved in many implementations of human resource systems, in pay systems, in pension systems, and really had never encountered a situation where the people that were intended to actually implement the new system were let go in advance of the system, the new system being put in place. So we found ourselves in quite an unfortunate situation where the talented people that were required to implement the new system just frankly weren't there, which made it a very difficult situation. And obviously, the Phoenix implementation has created enormous problems for a huge number of people that work for the federal government. So we've taken this issue very seriously. We've already made significant investments. We made a commitment in this budget that we would not only rethink how we can best deliver pay services to federal government employees to ensure they get paid appropriately and on time, but also have the right system going forward for the long term. And in that regard, we made a significant commitment in Phoenix over the long term of hundreds of millions of dollars, knowing that we need to get this right. It's not acceptable that federal government employees aren't paid properly. And the fact that we found ourselves in this difficult situation doesn't relieve us of the responsibility of getting it right, and that's what we're going to do. I will tell you that we will stay on this until every single employee is appropriately paid, and that continues to be the case every single bi-weekly pay cycle.
I really appreciate that, Minister. Thank you very much for that commitment. Another aspect of the budget which I found, or part of the measures which was taken by the government that really also will make a big difference for the people in my riding, especially people who do work outside of the public service, is the Canada Workers Benefit. That's probably one of the biggest social policy initiatives of a federal government, and that along with the Canada Child Benefit are probably the two biggest social programs that will make a real difference for getting people out of poverty. I was wondering, Minister, if you could again talk to the values which underlie that and where we go forward from there.
Well, maybe I can start with the overall frame. I mean, what we're trying to achieve, both in this budget more broadly, is to make sure that every Canadian has a real and fair chance at success. The Canada Workers Benefit, the newly named Canada Workers Benefit, is about encouraging people who aren't in the workforce, who are paid at a lower rate, to get into and stay in the workforce. We know, first and foremost, that we need to get to the people who actually are in that situation. So we did two things this year. First, we made sure that people who were eligible for the Canada Workers Benefit can automatically get it. We found that in many situations, people that were filing their taxes on paper weren't actually getting access to the Canada Workers Benefit. So we put in place an approach to make sure that everyone could actually get access to it. That's critically important because you're dragging people into the system that wouldn't otherwise be there, providing them with an encouragement to get into work and also an advantage when they're in work so they can stay there. And then we increase the amount. So what that does is it provides both slightly more income for people as they're in lower income jobs, and it provides it farther out on the pay scale. So we actually hit a larger number of people with that workers' benefit. Again, the issue is in the face of a demographic challenge, we need to be thinking about how can everyone have access to the workforce. It's clearly the case that people at the lower end of the income scale are seeking work. This is an encouragement for them to do so. And it'll help all of us because it'll make the economy more successful if we find a way to get more people engaged in work. So we think this is really one of those programs that helps the people that are most challenged in our economy, and by helping those individuals, we actually help everyone by making our economy more successful.
Thank you both. Turning to Ms. Wright, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, thanks for being here. Minister, your budget is your responsibility, and whether or not you succeed on the gender aspect is going to be at your feet. There is the word gender mentioned 358 times out of 368 pages. So I understand fully that this is something that you're putting forward. But it's going to be your leadership and your willingness to implement that's going to matter. Otherwise, we're going to have lots of very disappointed Canadian women out there. Now, Minister, I think it makes sense for us to take a look at your track record when we determine whether or not we can trust you to implement what you say you're going to do. And I would start with Morneau Chappelle, where you were executive chairman. And as you know, because you know your own statistics, at most on your board, you had 3 out of 9 positions occupied by women. In your senior management team, you had 3 out of 11 senior managers who were women. In your current board mandate, in your governance charters, in your nominating charters, there's no mention of diversity, inclusion, gender. The focus is on competence and capability and qualifications. On your annual report going all the way back to 2011, never once in the analysis of risks to your company, your former company, did it ever mention not hiring women. And I say this is important because you wrote in your budget that the main focus areas are more women in senior management positions and more company board seats held by women because it leads to better decision making. When did you determine that it was better decision making to have women around the boardroom table, Minister?
Well, I think these are really important questions. And like any other company in Canada, I think that the company that I was formerly associated with needs to ask itself the questions about how it can be most successful. What I will tell you is that the company that you're referring to, Morneau Chappelle, I no longer have any association with whatsoever. I resigned in the fall of 2015. Have subsequently sold all my shares in that company. So I hold no responsibility for any of those statistics that you identified. What I can tell you is that during the course of my business career, I found the effective way for us to be successful included trying to promote people who were highly effective, and promoting women was an important part of that objective.
They never made it to the C-suite, Minister.
Well, actually, you're incorrect.
3 out of 11 is abysmal.
Sorry, you're incorrect. The person that I appointed as chair of Morneau Chappelle on leaving was in fact a woman, as you might know.
She is still a woman, and indeed she was paid less than any other director in 2012 when you were there.
I fail to understand the context.
About the budget.
No, we're not. I'm sorry, I got off track. Let's talk about Finance Canada then, shall we, Mr. Chair? Finance Canada, there are 7 senior staff, either at the associate level or or at the assistant deputy minister level. 4 of them are women. 4 out of 11, Minister. That's your department. What's your response?
So my response in terms of my previous experiences, my response in terms of my current experience is that by promoting more women to senior roles, we have a more effective ability to be successful. That's certainly the approach that we are taking at Finance Canada. It's the approach that we've taken across government. Our approach to filling leadership positions in government appointments and offices has been to seek qualified people in every position, of course, but also do in a way that ensures that we get to a gender-neutral approach to how we move forward. This has been my experience over the course of my career, and we'll continue to move forward to try and make sure that we deal with what has been a challenging situation for women, whether it's been previously in business or now in government, to make sure that we get it right over the long term. That's the commitment that we've made since we've come into office. It's a commitment that was clearly demonstrated with the 358 references that you identified this year, and we'll continue with that approach going forward.
Minister, those are just words on a page. It's your actions that matter to us. And when I say us, I mean all women who are trying to do better in the workforce. Now, finally, Minister, you have direct control over your office, and you have 6 senior posts. You have Director of Communications, you have Director of Parliamentary Affairs, you have a Chief of Staff, and you have 3 senior advisors. Out of those 6 staff, the most senior staff to the Minister of Transport, Minister of Finance, you have 1 woman. Can you explain for me why you only have 1 woman in your senior staff?
What I can explain to you is that in our government broadly, in my role, whether it's in my office or in my role in working with the department, we will seek to ensure that we have successful operations, and also that we encourage the best and the brightest, especially including women, to take on leadership roles. That'll be our continuing approach. What we believe in our budget this year is that what we've done is shown ways that we can actually achieve those goals, both now and in the long term, because we know it'll make a difference, and that I think has been demonstrated quite clearly.
Aren't you just buying votes, Minister? Isn't that what this whole budget is about? It's a cynical political gesture that you're saying these words because you do not at all emulate or try to foster any of the things that you're talking about in your budget, either in your past corporate life, within your own department, or even in your own ministerial staff. Isn't this just a way to get a woman's vote? Isn't that what this is all about?
I actually find your line of questioning to be offensive. What I can tell you is that how I've comported myself in my life to date, what we're trying to achieve, is about getting the greatest amount of success possible. And I absolutely believe that doing that by promoting women into positions of leadership is one of the key success factors. We'll continue to do this. If people like you don't buy into it, that's a problem that we'll have to face. But my view is that we will be more successful collectively if we're actually able to successfully promote women into leadership roles. We will drag along the Neanderthals who don't agree with that, and that will be our continuing approach.
Well, I'm not a
Dussault,
Neanderthal under people like you.
Straight to Mr. Dussault. 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us today. Thank you for being here. I will begin with a question that should be easy enough to respond to because you are using the words middle class in the title of Budget 2018. So how do you define middle class? In our opinion, there is a real case to be made that most Canadians feel they are members of the middle class, which means that they feel they can always do better, and we feel it's important to find ways to improve the situation of a great majority of Canadians, and that's exactly what we are doing with our child benefits, for example, for 9 out of 10 families, but not for people making $150,000 a year and more. That's what we have done as well with the new Canada Workers Benefit to help middle-class people and those working to join the middle class who are in difficult economic straits. We will continue to work to improve the situations and the lives of the majority of Canadians who really are members of the middle class. So I take that to be that you don't have a definition. You're just speaking of the majority of Canadians. You don't have a definition of the middle class, clearly. On another topic, you have announced, well, 20 years ago, Liberals announced Medicaid. And now you're announcing once again that you are going to bring in something new on this scale, pharmacare. I'm ready to believe you this time around, but what's of concern to many of us, many people who've spoken up about this, is that the dice are loaded, by which I mean that you already know that the plan you have in mind, a national pharmacare, won't be public, it won't be universal, nor will it be free. And that seems pretty clear to everyone, and you're not admitting to that. Do you think it would be a good idea to create a panel of experts, even though you already have in mind exactly how you're going to go about this? You've got your plan already. And what do you say to those who say you are in conflict of interest in this matter because your company that you directed was in this type of business and pharmacare and various benefits for employees? We're not yet totally aware of what the best solutions will be, but we do know that there's a serious challenge out there. Many Canadians are now in a situation which keeps them from accessing medication. And that's a problem in the 21st century, clearly. So given that we have a challenge, we need to look for a solution. And for that, we need to consult appropriately. We've chosen Eric Hoskins to help us consult appropriately. We will look at this challenge. We'll look at the funding that can be planned for a future pharmacare program. And by going about it this way, we will find a solution. But clearly, we haven't yet found it. It's difficult. It's a difficult issue. The changes that have taken place over the last 10 and 20 years, as you said yourself, are considerable. There have been so many changes. Jobs, so many more people are working independently or not employed by companies. There's been quite a shift in the cost of medication as well. So the way of finding and suggesting a solution have got to take all these new challenges into account. That's why we have carefully thought through how to go about taking all these things into consideration. We will table a report and recommendations in order to facilitate an approach that will work for all Canadians. Thank you. I don't think that's very reassuring to anyone, that sort of answer. On another matter, because I know that my time is limited, the last time we saw you here at the committee, we spoke about tax agreements that the government was supposed to be reviewing our international commitments with a number of countries, Barbados, where Canada has a lot of direct foreign investments in Barbados, $68 billion, the third largest investment in foreign countries that Canada's had, and it took 4 months before the department that you head up to give us an answers, because we wanted to know what these $68 billion represented, what sort of investments. And 4 months later, we finally got, the clerk of the committee gave us a response. 95% of the $68 billion was in the financial sector, banks and management, that sort of thing. And it's a one-paragraph answer that we got. It didn't really throw more light on it for me. It led to more questions, actually. So since you've started looking at all this, is there a single international commitment that you have decided to withdraw, to get rid of? Speaking specifically of the Barbados one, for example. In our opinion, it's very important to have tax agreements with other countries. That helps ensure that our Canadian businesses can do business with other countries. So it's of great importance to ensure that this approach works, and that's our ongoing consideration. That being said, we do need to ensure that we keep in mind that tax systems are different from one country to another. That's why we have agreements with the OCDE on the common reporting standards. in order to help us work across countries. And yet keep in mind that each country has their own way of going about this. And of course, continue to see how we could go about doing this differently that would be more advantageous for everyone. Yes, agreements are necessary. We also need to clearly ensure that our approach is working for us, but is not leading to tax problems.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. I find it extremely offensive to suggest that buying votes for women is done in the types of policies and the transformational work. But let me set the stage a little about, once again, the hypocrisy that we hear from the other side. Let me ask this question. How many women did the Conservatives put on this committee? 0.
I don't.
0. But let's also talk about...
I think the questions are for the Minister.
Okay, let me go back to that then.
The Minister can answer that question. The Minister can answer that question.
It's easy when there's 3 and there's 0. There are currently 8 women in the Conservatives' shadow critic roles. 8. Prime Minister Harper had 6 ministers out of 26 in 2006. 12 out of 39 in 2013. I have Google too. And so let's talk about what this budget actually means for women, despite the hypocrisy coming from the other side over there. Is parental leave enhancement so women can get back to the workforce buying votes for women? Or is that about creating greater flexibility for women in the workforce? What about the funding and the carve-outs for supporting women entrepreneurs? Is that buying votes that the Conservatives believe? I mean, I guess they don't really know how the supports that women need, since they clearly don't see a role for a woman on the Finance Committee. What about women in trades? Is that important to the economy and to women? So perhaps, Minister, you can speak about the actual proposals in this budget and why you felt they were needed now. Because, I mean, we can all go back to the dark ages of the Harper Conservatives, but that hasn't helped women. So can you talk about what the future holds for women and some of these proposals, but we have to all acknowledge that this isn't the end, but certainly how some of these proposals in this budget are meant to not only stimulate the economy, but also to help women get into the workforce. And I want to bring up one line that I mentioned in my delegations to my local councils when I spoke about the budget, is that it was said in this budget that the issue of women in the economy is not just a moral issue, but it's an economic issue to be seized. The previous Conservatives, the current Conservatives, didn't bother to seize that moment. Can you talk about why you are?
Well, perhaps, I mean, the frame of this is always a situation that we find ourselves in. So we look back over the last 40 years and consider how our economy's grown. And 1/3 of the growth over the last 40 years has been women entering the workforce. So then you have to consider, have we gone as far as we can go in this regard? So women in Canada are in the workforce at a 61% workforce participation rate. Men are at a 70% workforce participation rate. That means we're 8th out of 29 OECD countries. In my estimation, we can do better than 8th out of 29. In terms of equal pay for equal work, we have women earning about 88 cents on the dollar of men for an equal amount of full-time work, if you want to look at it that way. And that's about 15th out of 29. So what we're saying is that as we face a significant demographic challenge, because we're having more people retiring as the baby boomers retire, that we need to make sure that all Canadians that want to work, that have the capacity to have an impact, are able to meet up to their full opportunities. That's the challenge we're facing. We think we can do better for women in this country, and we think that will have a really important impact for all Canadians. It'll also have a specific impact for women that actually find themselves in these advantageous situations. So the the parental leave that you were talking about, the 5-week use it or lose it, the idea is that we're going to get more second parents, and typically it's men, taking time off, which is going to have the ability for women to go back to the workforce more rapidly or in greater numbers. The idea that we're putting an additional amount of money through the BDC and the EDC for women entrepreneurs means there's more opportunity for women business leaders to be successful. And it means that for young women today, they'll see more opportunity in the future. The fact that when we put significant amount of money into science and research, and we say that we want to tilt that toward younger, more female, more interdisciplinary work, means that when a young girl is thinking about what field she might want to go into, she's likely to see more researchers that are going to be in science and engineering down the road because they will have more grants that will have been given to them. So these are all about the long-term idea that we want to see more success for women in our economy. It won't be done overnight. But I think the starting point that we began right at the very beginning of our government, where we look to fill leadership positions with an equal number of men and women, the continuing focus on how we can do better, it's going to have an impact. So for whether it's young woman of today or a girl who's just thinking about what she's going to do, she'll see that she'll have more opportunity in the future, and that will end up being better for her, and that will end up being better for our economy. And even for the people who don't buy into this, it will be better for them. So we're going to keep on it.
Thank you. And
I'm sorry, we'll have to end it there. Long question, long answer. 6 minutes gone. 5-minute rounds, Mr. Polyev.
You promised the budget would be balanced next year. Will it?
We're not going to take the conservative approach to cuts.
Sorry, this was the liberal approach in the platform, in the election platform. This was your platform. You said you would balance the budget next year. That's the liberal approach that you ran on. Are you now saying you were wrong when you ran on that?
What I'm saying is we're not going to take the conservative approach to cutting veteran services, for example, the conservative approach to boutique tax credits that only benefit the very wealthy. What we're going to do is continue to invest in Canadians because we know that Canada works when Canadians are working, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Will the budget be balanced next year, as you promised? That's a yes or no.
What we're doing right now is investing in Canadians.
Would you know if the budget's going to be balanced next year, or is there another minister who'd be responsible for answering that question?
What I can tell you is that we will continue with the successful approach we've taken to create a remedy to the failed approach that came before us.
Okay, so you don't know. You're the Finance Minister of Canada. You're not sure if next year the budget will be balanced. Well, I'll inform you then. Your plan foresees another quarter century of deficits. That's a quarter century longer than you promised when you were knocking on doors in the last election, Minister. During that quarter century, how much debt would the Government of Canada accumulate?
What I can tell you is that the additional $150 billion of debt that was put on by the previous government is obviously an additional challenge that we face, but we still find ourselves with a very low net debt to GDP. We're the best in the G7. We continue to be in a position where
under your fiscal plan, how much new debt will be added before the budget is balanced?
Mr. Minister, you have the right to finish your answer as long as it's not too long.
We will continue with the approach to having a very positive fiscal situation by reducing our debt as a function of our economy over time to among the lowest levels that we've seen.
So the minister doesn't know if the budget will be balanced next year. And when I inform him that his own fiscal plan sees 25 years of deficits, he can't tell Canadians how much debt will the Government of Canada accumulate during that time. I did a Control F on your budget, Minister, and the word balance, the term balanced budget does not appear once, according to my search. You can't do a balanced budget. You can't even write the words balanced budget. Can you say the word balanced budget?
Here's what I can say. The Conservative approach to cuts to things like veteran services, to cuts to things like people that are supposed to implement a new pay system for federal government services clearly failed. We ended up with a low growth rate. We ended up with a high unemployment rate. So the fact that more Canadians are working, that we have among the lowest unemployment rates in 40 years, I hope you're celebrating that because I imagine there's more people in your riding that are working, which is a positive for our economy.
You can't even say the words balanced budget.
Poilievre,
ran on.
I'm giving you equal time, both of you. So, Minister, if you could finish that answer, and then Mr. Poilievre will have another.
I'm happy to have his next question.
Okay.
So you don't know if the budget's going to be balanced next year. You don't know how much debt you're planning to add to the Canadian people. And now you can't even say the words balanced budget. Are you that allergic to balanced budgets that you can't even say the word?
What we have shown over the last 2 years is a very clear focus on Canadians. And what we've shown is that when you do that, you create a better economy. So the fact that our economy is growing significantly better than it was when we came into office, the fact that hundreds of thousands of more Canadians are working, the fact that we have a lowest unemployment rate we've seen in almost 40 years, lower than we saw in the entire period of the last government, these are enormous positives. So when Canadian families look at where they're at right now, consider the advantage that they took
where they're at is deeper
November
in debt because of you.
2015 when they got a new government. They are likely very pleased to see that we are in a much better position to be resilient to face any economic challenge that we face.
Go ahead.
So, Minister, the reality is you are adding debt at twice the rate you promised. You said that you would balance the budget next year. Now, you're not even capable of telling the Canadian people how much additional debt your plan would add over the next quarter century of deficits that you've set us on track to run as a country. At this point, are you prepared to admit that you had no intention of keeping your promise to the Canadian people in 2015, when you promised the budget would be balanced next year?
It's a challenge when someone hasn't had experience in managing a balance sheet or, in fact, managing anything of any substance. But what I can tell you is that what we found is that the way for us best to manage our economy is to reduce our debt as a function of the economy over time. And what we're seeing is that over the 5-year span that we've actually reduced the debt as a function of our economy and will continue to do so, putting us in a resilient place to deal with any economic challenge. The good news is we are in a strong position. We continue to be fiscally responsible. The government, as a function of the economy, is staying constant. That is a place where Canadians understand that we are focused on their interests and making sure our economy is stronger over time.
Mr. Sabara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Finance Minister Bienvenue. Minister, our record for the last 2.5 years speaks for itself, and it's a pretty, I would say, great record. We have, as you said, lowest unemployment rate for 40 years, hundreds of thousands of new jobs created. The Canada Child Benefit is lifting literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. In my riding of Vaughan Woodbridge, it delivered $60 million of funds to payment to families that need it. And thank you for indexing the Canada Child Benefit and doing it 2 years ahead of schedule, because that's going to continue to benefit families in my riding. They can use that to pay for their kids' sports activities, save for their kids' future, and maybe play for some hockey or soccer ballet lessons. The riding I represent is I'm blessed to represent and privileged to represent those folks. We're blessed with a number of, I would call, barometers. We have the busiest intermodal facility in the country. The intermodal facility, Canada Pacific Intermodal Facility. We have CN Rail has their largest facility in the country. Recently, the Prime Minister joined UPS Canada in their $500 million investment, and that facility is located in the city of Vaughan. The Home Depot Distribution Center for all of Eastern Canada is located there. We also have Martin Rea, Magna, and York Region. And we want to continue to make sure our investment competitiveness is maintained, that these companies that are making these announcements, including UPS, continue to choose Canada, as many companies are, to invest in its people and organization. And I wanted to hear your thoughts, and I can bring back these thoughts to the riding and the constituents I represent, about how we're going to continue maintaining Canada's attractiveness for international companies and domestics, of course, to invest.
Well, this is a very important question. I can tell you that having had the opportunity to go across Canada after the presentation of the budget, I heard many things from businesses that were considering investments. I heard in many cases people challenged to find workers. We've got a situation where employment, of course, has gone down, so finding and keeping good workers is a challenge. And I also heard about businesses that were concerned about our long-term competitive environment. The good news is that we are in a positive economic situation to deal with challenges that we're presented with. But of course, there's always real challenges that we have to consider. In the current environment, we obviously are renegotiating NAFTA, which presents some uncertainty for businesses. We have changing tax rates in the United States, which present people with business investment differences as they consider those changed tax rates. And we have global trading changes that are going on. So we need to consider that changed competitive environment. I will tell you that what we're doing right now is making sure we understand the impact of those tax changes so we can ensure we stay competitive. We're fighting hard on behalf of Canada at the NAFTA table to get to a better arrangement for all three parties. And we're looking carefully to make sure that we stay competitive. I will be taking time over the course of the next number of months listening to Canadians and Canadian business leaders to understand how these challenges, these changes are impacting them. But what I can tell you is that we continue to have, as you go out of the country, a huge appetite for Canadian investment. We have great people in the country, highly educated workforce. We have great resources. We have a stable political system that creates long-term comfort for investors. So it's a positive place from which we start. And what we are committed to doing is to maintaining that continuing competitiveness by looking at all those aspects of importance for businesses as they make investments.
Okay.
Mr. Savara.
I would like to touch upon the budget 2018 in terms of its reference to gender. To personalize it, I have two young, precocious daughters at home who are the love of my life, obviously my wife and I. And I know that, and I've told you this personally, that, and I thanked you for making their future brighter. And I say that with all sincerity, Minister, because what we did in our budget is something I'm proud of. I'm proud to be part of a government that's its focus. And re-emphasizing just how important it is for our economy that women, specifically, the increase in labor force participation rates, equal pay for equal work, and et cetera. And if you can just close it off and provide your thoughts, that'd be great, because I'm very, very proud of our budget and it's focused on making sure those gaps are reduced.
Well, we're certainly pleased with what we put in the budget, but we realize there's always more work to be done in this and in every other area. We know that if we create the opportunities for young women to see that they can be successful in all fields of endeavor, and that they will have role models in those places, that we're more likely to see long-term success. So we're laying the groundwork for the next government and the government after that to have increasing success in this area. Certainly we will be monitoring what we've done to make sure that it's actually having the kind of impact that we want it to have, and ensuring that, as we did this year, by putting more money together for women entrepreneurs, for example, even though we'd already had significant funds over the last couple of years, making sure that we constantly consider if we have to refresh the approaches to have continued and lasting impact. So we're proud of it as well, but again, more to do.
We'll have to leave it there, Minister. Mr. Albas, and then we'll have three quick questions from three other members. Mr. Albas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. Minister, there is a growing perception, not just around the country, but definitely in the Okanagan and throughout my riding, where people feel the government does not have a firm grasp on its expenses, that in fact you're spending a lot of money in a lot of different areas and it is adding to the debt. Now, I'm sure that reasonable people can agree that some of it may be good, but when people see extravagances and excesses, I would hope that you would agree that that's not good for anyone to have faith in the institutions that are supposed to be spending those money correctly and with all prudence. And I have to say, I'm slightly alarmed that you won't even utter the word balanced budget. It's almost like it is a dirty word for you. Previous Liberal and Conservative finance ministers would work very hard to come to the Commons to say to the people's representatives that they had succeeded, or at least that they had worked towards the balance, towards receiving a balanced budget. It worries me, and I will say, Minister, that may not concern you. But I tell you what, there are people in this country that are getting concerned that you will not even say to the people's representatives here when or how much, when you will turn to balanced budget, when or how much money you're going to be putting us into debt. That doesn't beg confidence. Minister, I spoke with a pensioner from the Okanagan. Her name is Donna. Donna is quite concerned about her grandchildren inheriting a lot of debt that mainly is being applied not during a war, not during a recession, but it's being done for ideological reasons and contrary to certain promises. Minister, Donna has given me a check. She's actually written out of her own pocket. She's estimated the consumer price index on early age security. And she has said that she wants to see it go towards the debt. Now, Minister, and not towards other spending. Minister, will you, A, accept this check, and B, Minister, will you ensure that it absolutely goes towards paying down the debt and not towards other spending?
Well, let me first address the context of your question. We believe that our budget has struck the right balance. We continue to, thank you, that's very much appreciated. We continue to believe that Canadians, when they made a choice in 2015, made the right choice. I appreciate that you want us to go back to doing things the way that the Conservative government before us did, and to focus on one number, and to do so in a way that unfortunately would lead us to a really bad outcome. Because what we found with the previous approach was that we had really bad unemployment and we had much lower growth. So our approach, which has been to focus on responsibly investing in Canadians, to growing the economy, to think about getting more people working, is working. I know that as you go out around your riding, you'll find that more people are working because that's just statistically what's happening in this country. So when we find that policies are working, I think we need to embrace them. As patriotic Canadians, I hope that even the people in the Conservative Party would say that they're pleased when the economy is doing well. The economy is doing well. The approach we've taken is working, and we're doing it while reducing the size of the federal debt as a function of GDP in a gradual way that really makes sense.
You know, Minister, you have the, I think, distinct honor, I guess, or dishonor, depending on your view, and because Canadians do not, I absolutely agree, do not all share the same perspective of your government. But when you describe people as Neanderthals and things like that, I got to say, it doesn't portray, oh, never mind. I think what I'm trying to say here, Minister, is that when you do not listen to people, and just respond from rote talking points, it really does not build faith in government. Now, Minister, you are hitting a milestone in this coming year, $1 trillion in debt, something that no finance minister has had before. And all I hear again is that, I'll sum it up, you know, will you tell the Canadian public when you will be, when you plan to balance the budget?
I will say that with greater transparency comes some responsibility for people to look at it. When you talk about numbers like that, you are really, you're comparing the $150 billion of debt that the previous government left us, that additional debt, with the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation balance sheet, which actually supports the mortgage market in our country. These are apples and oranges. So I suspect when you look at those numbers, you should understand what you're actually talking about. We're talking about a balance sheet that supports mortgage, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. We're talking about a balance sheet of the Business Development Bank of Canada, which supports entrepreneurs. We're talking about a balance sheet of the Export Development Bank of Canada, which supports exporters. And you're comparing that with the debt that Stephen Harper and, you know, the people to your right and the people to your left, as the previous government left Canadians. These are not comparable. They're different things. We will continue to be fiscally responsible. We'll continue to reduce the debt as a function of the GDP. We'll do it in a way that allows us to invest in Canadians and continue the very good situation that we're in right now.
Mr. Minister, we'll have to end it there. I got 3 people that need to get on. I'm going to go to Mr. Greywald for one question, Mr. Kelly for one question, and Mr. McLeod, and if we have time, we'll go back to Dezeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I have 4 very small questions. I'm going to answer them all in one question, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm going to ask them all in one question. Minister, since our government came into power, how many jobs have been created? What is the unemployment rate? How are we doing in terms of growth? And how are we doing in terms of G7 nations?
Look, we as all of us in this room, as patriotic Canadians, have to feel good when we look at ourselves compared to other countries. We are in a situation where, to start with, our balance sheet's in a very good position, and that means we're resilient. We have the lowest debt to GDP among G7 countries, and it's not just the lowest by a little bit, it's half the average, so it's a very good starting point. We have an unemployment rate that's gone from 7.1% back in the time we got into office down to about 5.8%. About 600,000 new jobs created, which is the answer to your question. So in a U.S. context, that would be 6 million new jobs. These are big, big numbers, so very positive. And the growth rate that we've seen over the last year and a half has been the fastest among G7 countries, about 3%. We will, of course, face challenges going forward. We always will face challenges. But starting from a position like that, where more Canadians are working, where we have a great balance sheet, where we've seen the kind of growth we've seen, allows us to deal with those challenges in a way that puts us in a favorable position. And
I hate to cut you off,
there.
Mr. Minister. I know you've got to be out of here at 6:20. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. A quick question. A cursory look at all of the other provincial and territorial current budgets in each case reveals either a date to return to balance if they are not running a balanced budget already, or some kind of a plan and a target. Why are you the only finance minister in Canada that has no plan for a balanced budget and will not address the issue of a balanced budget in a 400-page budget document?
What I will tell you is that no matter how many times the Conservative members ask us to follow the playbook of the previous Conservative government.
In Canada, Minister.
We won't do it. What we will do is continue to invest in Canadians, to make sure that we find ourselves in a positive situation, make sure more Canadians are working, and make sure we do it in a responsible way. Demonstrating that responsible approach to reducing debt as a function of our economy over time is actually the way that we can ensure that we are balancing things in the appropriate way and not taking the conservative approach to cutting things that might be of enormous value, to find ourselves in an illusory advantage that is only short-term.
Like
Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think the minister will be too surprised about my line of questioning. I've raised the issue about investment in the North many, many times, and over the last while, we've really built up a deficit in many areas, including infrastructure. And however, we've started to see a steady stream of ministers and staff from our government coming to the Northwest Territories in the last while, including the Minister of National Revenue, and really had some good discussions. And the CRA and the government of the Northwest Territories recently reached an agreement to launch automated benefit services across the territories. Could the minister just talk a little bit about the benefits of having this service in the Northwest Territories and what change it'll bring to families in the North?
As we think about the importance of getting benefits to Canadians, one of the things we addressed in our budget this year was thinking about two key benefits that are critically important for either individuals as they get into the workforce, the Canada Workers Benefit, or families, the Canada Child Benefit. And in both those cases, we found that people were not necessarily automatically getting those benefits. It impacted people worse in places where there was a higher likelihood that they were actually completing their tax returns on paper. And so we found in places where there wasn't the same level of broadband, for example, that it was more likely people were completing their tax returns on paper. That, of course, is a continuing challenge in some parts of the North. So our approach to dealing with that was really both on the one hand to make those benefits automatic, and we did that with both the Canada Child Benefit and the Canada Workers Benefit, which will increase the take-up rate, having a big impact on people in the North. and also by continuing to make investments in getting access to technology. So, you know, we made a $500 million investment in broadband in budget 2016. In this budget, we made an investment in what's called low Earth orbiting technology, looking at a new approach to getting access to broadband for people in remote communities that we think will have an impact over time. So we continue to be focused on how we can impact people, obviously, in all parts of the country, recognizing that there are unique challenges in rural communities, but also in northern and remote communities. And we think this will have a measurable impact on those.
Thank you, Minister. Last question, Mr. Dussault.
Oui, merci. C'est très rapide.
Yes, thank you. My question will be a short one, given the time left. So, household debt, 171%, as you know, from the last reports. We learned upon hearing these figures that the finance minister had no tools to really evaluate what danger this represented to the economy of Canada. That's what we learned from the media. So can you today assure us or confirm, basically, that at the Department of Finance you're undertaking no studies of what threat this might represent, household indebtedness, and tell us, you know, just how large this problem is, because 171 seems pretty high figure for me. So do you have any studies on this, and can you tell us how dangerous it is? We carry out many studies about the debt and the indebtedness of households. It's a very important matter, and we certainly study this in the Department of Finance Canada. The Bank of Canada as well pays great attention to indebtedness. We've done a number of important things to address the situation. Most household debt is in mortgages, is sunk in mortgages. About 2/3 of household debt is represented by mortgages. Well, even more than 2/3 in fixed mortgages, for example. So we see clearly that we need to figure out how to deal with this, change this in the future, this mortgage indebtedness issue. And we've looked at this many times now. We're shifting the situation with the measures we've undertaken. It's an important matter. And we will remain vigilant and proactive on the matter of household debt to ensure that the risk decreases in future.
And thank you, Minister and Deputy Minister, for coming. We will now suspend for a few minutes while departmental officials come up, and then we will go till 7:15. So meeting suspended. Thank you again, Minister, Deputy. departmental officials here from Finance, Department of Finance. Ms. Landell, Chief Financial Officer. Mr. Botham, Assistant Deputy Minister, Economic Development. Mr. Stewart, Assistant Deputy Minister, International Trade. And Mr. Sherlin, who's Director General, Social Policy, Federal Provincial Relations. And that's you all, I guess. Welcome, folks. I don't believe you have an opening statement. You're ready to go to questions, or if you do, Ms. Lanell, let us know.
We're good.
Okay, so Ms. O'Connell, first up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm so disappointed. We don't have any women on the Conservative side anymore. I was really looking forward to walking the talk, but I guess it was just when the cameras were here for the minister. But getting to the department, I'm wondering if you might not be able to answer this, but obviously in the statements, home care mental health expenses are up 200%. We know in terms of the agreement with provinces, so why, I'm not sure if you can answer it or not, I'm just wondering if the provinces and territories have actually provided more details on how that funding will be used.
The Mike Siddell, don't worry about that.
Thank you. So we did update the numbers in the statutories, but they are not included as part of these interims today, but they were updated based on the rules behind those transfer payments.
Okay.
So we'll be seeing that in the main estimates.
Okay, fair enough. So I'll wait till then. In terms of budget projections and market volatility, obviously we've seen some fluctuations, certainly from the U.S. and different policies there, but certainly that's not always the only issue, the only cause and effect. But how regularly, or what's the process for recalculating some of these projections based on volatility? And what are some of the risks that the department is building in for things, like NAFTA certainly, but also some of the policies in the U.S. and how that then impacts some of our markets and some of these concerns? Or is that kind of a global risk that is always factored in?
Who's up?
I think that's a good question.
Yes, if somebody else wants to come up, just sit at the table, give us your name. You might as well sit around. Oh, look, there's lots of chairs there. Don't be shy, so just pull up the chairs so you're all here. Mr. Laswick.
Thank you for the question. So as part of resetting the economic and fiscal framework in the budget, similar to how we do it in the fall update, we survey our group of private sector economists. So the economic projections that underpin the budget are effectively a straight average of the group of 14 private sector economists. So answering your question, in that group of economists, there's a broad range of different risk scenarios, and there's a broad range of factors that they include in their baseline forecast. Like, for instance, when we surveyed this group of economists in December, leading to our preparation of the budget, there were about half of them that anticipated successful passage of the U.S. Tax reform plan, which came to, obviously, fruition towards the end of the month. Likewise, there were a handful of economists that assumed some impacts with respect to the uncertainty around NAFTA trade negotiations. So all that considered, we take a straight average. So there's the highs and the lows, but we take, again, just a straight average to build it into our forecast. Likewise, we included in this budget a bottom line risk adjustment or a contingency that's manifests itself in terms of a $3 billion adjustment to the baseline forecast. Again, to give ourselves some, I guess, risk adjustment should we need it. So they're considered, I guess, prudent fiscal planning assumptions.
Thank you. And that risk adjustment, that had been a common practice previously, is my understanding, and then was taken out and now added back in? Or is that completely a ministerial, departmental kind of discretionary decision?
It's discretionary, but it's been standard practice for a generation now. I mean, it's changed in value from $6 billion to as high as, or excuse me, $3 billion to as high as $6 billion in previous budgets, but this budget maintained it at $3 billion over the forecast horizon.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Do I have time for one more?
You got time for one more.
Thank you. I just wanted to, in the Library of Parliament's briefing notes, I'm not sure if you've all seen that, but regardless, there are several slides and there are several indicators in terms of the GDP ratio. Now, obviously, there are lots of discussions on what's the best economic forecasting and determination of the health of our economy. Can you speak to why the debt to GDP ratio is significant and why, in terms of the forecasting and certainly in comparison to other G7 countries, why this standard of measuring long-term projections is important?
So I mean, there's two ways to look at, I guess, deficits. One is just on a nominal basis, so just straight up, what is the the value of deficits that the government is incurring over the forecast horizon. But quite frankly, it doesn't probably give you the true picture of the magnitude of the deficit unless you position it against the size of the economy, which I guess then from nominally switching to a relative term, it's putting that nominal value over to on top of the value of the economy, which gives you the deficit GDP ratio, and then over time a debt to GDP ratio, which gives rating agencies and other commentators and people who purchase our debt, and frankly just general Canadians, an understanding of what is the debt load that we're carrying as a relative size of the total Canadian economy.
Okay, thank you both. Mr. Albas, about 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for the work you do for our country. Just in regards to the previous conversation with the Minister of Finance, obviously, Canada does have a debt, and it is set in the next year to go over $1 trillion. So if we could just have a breakdown of what is federal debt and what is market debt and what the interest payments should be in 2018.
Somebody else want to come up, pull up a chair and sit at the table? Mr. Morrow, the floor is yours, sir.
Hi, thank you for your question. First, I'd like to clarify that when you refer to the $1 trillion debt, market debt, does that also take into consideration the debt of the Crown Corporation? So you need to distinguish the federal debt, so the debt that's the federal government by itself, which is about $700 billion right now, and you need to add about $330 billion to capture the Crown. So basically, that's the way that you decompose it. This is the market debt, so that's the debt that's financed on the market. So basically, it's different than the net debt that we often refer to when you look at the net debt to GDP. This is basically overall debt of the government plus some of its liabilities that you net out of the asset the government owns right now.
Those assets, though, are not like traditional assets where you can just put them on the market and sell, because obviously there's a reason why government is retaining those.
The liabilities, we could finance it if we want. It's only that we finance as we go. It's mostly linked to a pension plan. So basically, every year we need to pay more than what we receive in some cases. So that's why we finance it like on an annual basis, and we don't pre-fund those liabilities.
So interest payments for this next fiscal year that we're coming into, what's it projected to be at?
Right now, like I could say that the average interest rate that we pay on our debt is 1.2%. So in terms of interest payment, in terms of billion of dollars, I think it's around like $13 billion we will need to pay.
Okay. Just again, I've seen the number 26 billion. Is that something that you've seen?
26 billion. I don't know exactly what you refer to.
Okay. Well, again, it's my understanding that we spend about, yes, please.
Yeah, sorry. So that would be not just interest on market debt, but interest on other interest-bearing debt, such as our pension and benefit obligations. So that's a group of around $250 million in debt that we also incur interest charges on. So it's different than the coupon payment that we pay on the market side, but it's still interest-bearing debt.
Is it expected to accelerate faster over the next year?
Which debt obligation?
Yes.
I can get back to you on that. I would assume it's probably market debt, but it's hard for me to answer that with certainty. But
Okay.
I can follow up with the clerk on that one.
Great, thank you. Mr. Albus.
First of all, since the government came into office, how much debt has it added, and what should it be expected? What is the current 5-year projection from this year's budget?
That's information that we can find in the budget right now in terms of projection of deficit.
Yeah, I'd like it to read into the record, please.
Nick, I have the answer. So on a running basis, our cumulative change in the financial position since 2015-16 fiscal year. So sitting as at today, so we're leading up to closing the 2017-18 fiscal year towards the end of the week, we will have rallied towards around $36 billion in accumulated net debt.
The 5-year plan presented?
It's about $114 billion.
Okay, so about close to 114 or 115?
Just so I understand your question correctly, over the forecast horizon presented in the federal budget, it would be approximately $114 billion.
Okay. No, I certainly appreciate that. I don't have any other questions on the debt, Mr. Chair.
All right, that'll be dandy. Mr. Dussault.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci à vous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, all of you, for being here with us today. My first question will be somewhat technical, but it's something that I think about quite a lot. The whole point of having a interim estimates, the interim supply, it's I guess the idea is to have the upcoming budget more in line with the budget statements, the main estimates that we've when we get them. But at credit vote number 1, Minister of Finance, $23 million is what's being requested, that being about a quarter of the value of the main estimates, 2017-18. Same for the other departments too. They're asking for about a quarter. But we see at the end that this is to undertake the $23 million, a vote basically, up to 95,000. A certain amount, which appears in the document, 95,355,613 in the fiscal year for the purposes of this vote. So that's 95 million. Why didn't you simply include that 95 million in the vote? Why have you just gone about it this way? All right, if I understood your question, you're asking us why we're only asking for 25% of the value of the amount, main estimates. Yes, you're asking for 23 million, but here you're saying that you're speaking of authorities to enter into commitments up to 95 million. In the description here, vote number 1. So I'm asking what use an interim supply budget is, if an interim estimates report is, if you're basically asking what you're going to be asking at the main estimates anyway. Well, a lot of the expenses we have, the expenditures we have are long-term. So I do see your point of view. By asking for funds under Section 32, we might be undertaking and committing to spend the amount. But when we draw up our contracts, we do take into account the amounts that have been released. A lot of the costs are salary costs, are pay costs, not goods and services costs, which would represent a greater risk. We, of course, have a long-term plan for spending the money. So it's really the issue of commitments here that I'm looking at, that wording. A question of a more general nature, given that the other members have been allowed to ask questions that weren't necessarily directly linked to the interim estimates report here. Here, of course, there's the matter of promising pay equity. But there needs to be no amount associated to such a project to achieving pay equity. So is anyone able to speak to this lack? The fact that pay equity is being promised, but there doesn't seem to be any funding for it. Because, of course, pay equity is of great concern for people in the civil service. So is there any way we can see how this is going to be achieved?
Mr. Leswick?
Yes, sir, and thank you for the question. I mean, the very short answer is that the methodology to implement a new pay equity regime is still under development and wasn't communicated in the budget, but the government has made a commitment to table legislation and obviously details before the end of the calendar year.
OK. Sinon, une autre question que j'avais pas eu le temps d'adresser, c'est...
A question I haven't had a chance to put yet. In the budget, 2018 budget, in the budget statement anyway, we see that we will be clawing back $184 million by 2022 in the fight against tax evasion. But the Minister of Revenue, and actually several ministers have mentioned that $25 billion has been identified as tax evasion monies that the government should be able to claw back and collect. So why is there such a large difference between the amount identified as tax evasion money, whereas in the budget we see only $184 million by 2022-23?
The $25 billion is represented by CRA, and it represents the total annual value of all tax recoveries at both the federal and provincial levels across all compliance initiatives. What's represented in the budget is a very small subset of new initiatives that would support compliance activities in, for instance, GST, HST evasion, and another example is non-resident income disclosure. So again, just a very small subset of the larger $25 billion collections and compliance activities at CRA on an annual basis. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you. We'll have to end it there. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the presenters today. I wanted to ask a question about the investment in Indigenous people that we've seen in the budget. We've seen some significant investments in the last while, and it's been really made a lot of people happy that we finally got the attention of a government to try to move forward. I represent the North, and we have huge challenges. Our suicide rates in the North are 20, 30 times national average. 50% of all the First Nations children live below the poverty line. The unemployment rate is double the national average. So there's so many stats we could point to. And we're starting to see a lot of money coming forward, but it's spread out over many, many departments. The bulk of the money is coming through Indigenous, the two Indigenous departments, the former INAC departments, but there's 34 departments across this government that have money that is earmarked for Aboriginal people. I wanted to know what the role of Department of Finance is in terms of providing oversight. Who's actually in charge of making sure the money is going where it's supposed to be going in terms of allocation and all these different checks and balances that we expect to have in place?
Yes. So let me try to answer that question because it's a fairly complex question. It goes to the structure of if you will, of the various ministers and their responsibilities, accountabilities, and portfolios. And so we at the Department of Finance will be working with all various departments in terms of what their roles are and what their programs and responsibilities. We'll be working with them and making some decisions in terms of the funding and the support in order to advance the cause. When it comes to the machinery, because I think fundamentally the question you're dealing with is the broader machinery of government issue in terms of whether those programs should be spread or not spread. That really doesn't fall within the purview of the Department of Finance. I think that's more of it's a broader question. We look at working with the departments. There has been, and the government is committed to rethinking at least the department of that used to be called INAC into the two departments, and their consultation is going right now in terms of what the responsibilities and the roles of each of these departments should be. And I think that's where part of that conversation is going, and we'll see where it lands fully in the coming months.
All right. Yeah, thank you. And I totally agree with you. The financing arrangements and the agreements with the different First Nations and the Métis and Inuit is a very complex issue and hard to track. We have, a National Indigenous Organization table for the Métis, one for the First Nations, one for the Inuit, and one for the Land Claims Coalition. But the Land Claims Coalition is broken up into two: those that have settled land claims and those have settled self-government. And we got pots of money flowing here, but not to here. And then we got some are on reserve, off reserve. So I was hoping that somebody was providing oversight so we could really keep a good eye on how things are going, because I'm not sure if money is flowing to all different Aboriginal Indigenous governments across Canada, and that's concerning because some of those people are in my riding. And we have a huge deficit when it comes to trying to bring Indigenous people up to the Canadian standard of living. And many people have posed this question to me about how do we ensure that the money is sufficient so that we can try to tackle some of these big issues. And they've suggested that maybe we should look at tying the investment to the GDP, a percentage of GDP. Is that something we can consider?
I don't think it'd be inappropriate for me to. I think it would be inappropriate for me to kind of comment on what may or may not be. There has been in budget 2018. There is some investments on the question of the new fiscal relationship. So there has been some investment in that to support that dialogue, and I think there's been a number of fronts with various groups to ensure that these kind of questions are being looked at.
One final question then. We know that relative to other Canadian, the Canadian population, the Indigenous people are not benefiting from Canada's economic prosperity and wealth. However, do we have those in terms of facts? Do we have research going on within finance to tell us where we're at in terms of meeting the Canadian standards for Indigenous people?
I'm not sure whether we have all of that. I'd have to go back and check. I myself am not aware of all of this, but I could undertake to see what it is that we have at the department and communicate it back to the committee via the clerk.
Okay, you got time for a short one, Michael.
Maybe the department could tell me what their mandate is in terms of what was in the mandate letter from the Prime Minister in terms of Aboriginal people for the Department of Finance.
So the minister, and I don't have the letter with me, so I'm going to paraphrase and probably not do justice to the text of the letter. But the main commitment is working with the Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations, Northern Affairs ministers on the new fiscal relationship and the question of removing the 2% cap.
Okay, thank you both. Mr. Kelly, and going to 5-minute rounds.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my comments or my questions would be directed likely to Mr. Leswick, and in part in reaction to some of what you had said in response to an earlier question, but more to what the minister had said in his remarks. He talked about the debt to GDP level and how low the federal debt to GDP was in Canada, then compared it to other jurisdictions like the United States and G7 countries. Is that really a proper comparison, given that in the United States, for example, almost all significant social program expenditure, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, etc., they have a federal Department of Education and other services are funded federally, to then not include provincial debt in that calculation and compare those two countries. What do you know, and can you tell the committee what the debt to GDP level of all government debt, including Crown Corporation debt, which is important to consider as well?
Indeed. Thank you for the question, because it helps establish clarification. So the statistic the minister quotes is an internationally comparable statistic. In other words, There are various adjustments made by the IMF and OECD to establish a common comparison of debt between countries. And one of those adjustments is indeed the fact that we would add the value of provincial and territorial government debt into our debt metric. Likewise, US and other G7 countries would add their sub-sovereign levels of government into their debt metric as well. So it is on a comparable basis. Extending it a little bit further though, because the dynamics of government are so different in terms of how we, for instance, fund our social security schemes, like, we contribute assets into the CPP, QPP, whereas other jurisdictions just throw those premiums into their national revenues. It does become, quite a set of adjustments. I'm just saying that just quite objectively in terms of
to actually make apples to apples comparisons.
To try and make apples to apples, exactly. So the IMF and OECD do this gymnastics, and then they publish this on a quarterly basis in order to update those comparisons.
Right, and this business, and he reacted quite a bit to my colleague, Mr. Albus, on this issue of total crown debt and the $1 trillion. And you pointed out that it's the necessity of delineating these two numbers, and yet the government has used the concern over this total debt in its housing policy, which has resulted in many taking home ownership out of the hands of many Canadians in many markets that are not of the concern of the department. So it sounded almost like having it both ways. I mean, the total debt number is, if that's what policy is going to be driven from, including housing policy, then ought that not to be the total debt number you use?
The total debt numbers we are using is mostly it's as a result of the new borrowing authority framework that the government put in place in 2017. So the objective was to be more transparent, and therefore we wanted to include all our debt. So all the debt that the government needs to finance on the market, that include the Crown Corporation debt. That's why right now we're talking about a number of $1 trillion. We got a borrowing authority in 2017 for the next 3 years of $1.168 billion. And it's because of increased transparency that we're referring to that number right now.
I'm finished.
Then back to Mr. Ferguson and then Mr. Braliev.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, puis merci à tous les...
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses who have appeared here today. I can tell you that I really appreciate this new system, having this new process for the interim estimates. I think it's really very logical for one thing. I've got a couple of questions, and I'll start with the more general one. To what extent does this new process around the main estimates affect you or have an effect on your working processes at Department of Finance Canada and for the Minister of Finance? Well, on the process side, process and procedures, we need to regularly apply for funding, and so this adds an extra layer of process in the department. We clarify and we document, but this leads to a more stable position before we move into the main estimate. So besides that, it hasn't really had much of an impact on us. So into my more specific question now. Really highly specific, I think. When we looked at the tables that had been drawn up based on the Treasury Board Secretariat data, and I will quote this, it's the 2018-19 Interim Estimates Report, Schedule 1, page A19. We see there that the Minister of Finance, and it is at vote number 5 to spend $1 on the Bretton Woods and Related Agreements Act. Can you tell us what that's about? Sure, I'll try to explain this to you. If you will allow me to go ahead in English, because it's really a very technical matter. Sure, go ahead.
to the Bretton Woods, like the International Development Association, part of the Bretton Woods system. That's a legislatively based payment.
But how much in total?
And that's, well, for this fiscal year, it is a total of $441.61 million, and that goes to the World Bank to support their concessional window development funding programs.
Good.
Because it's legislatively based, it doesn't need to be voted on through the full appropriations, but there does need to be appropriation authority to make that legislative payment. So this is why as I understand the technical aspects of this estimates accounting mechanism, that is why there is an appropriation request for $1 that provides the appropriation authority for the ministry to make that legislative payment to an international financial institution.
Merci pour cette explication.
I can explain that.
For the explanation, because I was a little concerned. I mean, I was expecting a large number, 100 million, but hey, 1 million. Or $1 rather than $1 million. Is there any other situation similar to that you could tell us about? It's a real placeholder, I guess, $1, isn't it?
For the international financial system payments that the Department of Finance makes. No, this is unique.
No, there is no other such appropriation request from our side. There may be adjustments with specific low amounts, but this is the only $1 amount. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
Yep.
Gather this Saturday, we will reach a real milestone. Bill Morneau will become the $1 trillion man, and as Canada will reach $1 trillion in borrowing at the end of this week. Now, the government has talked a lot about its new debt promise, distinct from the old one. The old one was that they would balance the budget by 2019, that the deficit would never exceed $10 billion. The new one is just that the debt to GDP ratio at a federal level will decline. I want to talk about whether or not I want to ask you about whether that measurement is really complete if we're trying to determine what level of debt the Canadian economy can withstand. The federal government is one level of government. We have provincial governments which have additional debt, and then municipalities which in some cases do issue their own debentures that have to be paid by property taxpayers. On top of that, we have corporate debt and personal debt. These other levels of debt are important because the same taxpayers who will be expected to shoulder the higher servicing costs that you anticipate in the federal budget framework are carrying their own personal debt. So the $2 trillion economy we have is not just supporting the $651 billion federal debt. It's also supporting the provincial debt and the household debt. The Gluskin and Chef chief economist, Dr. Rosenberg, did a calculation a month ago now showing that the combined Canadian debt, personal, corporate, and government, as a share of GDP is higher than debt levels in 15 or 20 other countries, including Greece, Italy, Spain. Do you not believe that the government should look at the overall debt burden of the Canadian population when determining how much the federal government can afford to borrow?
Mr. Leswick, if you want to take that on. I know you can't get into the political decisions that are made, but go with it where you might.
Just to acknowledge the question, to be very brief, but indeed we would have to consider the entire debt load that the national economy is supporting from both a corporate, household, and total government basis. So again, when you talk about interest rate sensitivity, it's what is the ability of a household to withstand interest rate increases against their household debt payments, which is predominantly, as the minister suggested, 2/3 of mortgage payments, Likewise, the balance sheet of the of provincial, territorial, and local governments. And then again, as we talk increasingly in a higher yield environment, what is the ability of the corporate sector to incentivize its own investment in the face of higher corporate spreads and higher yields?
Well, I mean, if you think of the Canadian economy as being a workhorse, and then the debt loads being in the wagon behind that workhorse, it's one thing to say, well, the federal government's debt load is, we can put that in the wagon and the horse can pull the wagon. But that does not remember that horse also has to pull provincial debts, municipal debts, corporate debts, and then the massive personal debts. Those are all in that wagon as well. So when we consider increasing the weight of the federal debt in that wagon, ought we not look at the other weight that the Canadian economy is pulling?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to completely acknowledge the point that's being made. And again, it's about the distribution of debts too. I mean, we want to maintain a growth track so that we don't, unduly pull back on growth by suffocating either the corporate, government, or household sector from, acquiring credit, making purchases, investing in new homes or machinery and equipment. So it's a little bit about the distribution of that debt across the various sectors that you talk about as well.
Does Finance Canada have all of an economy-wide measurement of debt that includes personal, corporate, and government?
Yes, sir. Absolutely, we do. I do not have the metrics at my fingertip, but of course we, working with partners across government, we have a keen eye on.
Could you provide that to the committee?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you.
To the committee red time, but and I don't want to really get into this discussion, but if you have no investment, your economy's going nowhere either. I mean, you can't be all of one and none of the other. You've got to. I've been in business, and if you don't make investments, yes, you got debt, but you got to make investments to get growth too, right? Mr. Sobera.
Hi.
And we will have time for one more if there's anyone else.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, everyone. Quick question. The term market debt, does that include CMHC and related entities debt, like the CMB, NHA programs?
Yes. When we talk about the market debt, the $1 trillion, we include the NHA and BS.
Okay. Literally, and just for my colleagues across the other side, the debt that's for CMHC literally we're talking about millions of Canadians sitting at home tonight in their homes that purchased a home, that had less than 20% down payment on their home, that were required to buy the insurance on their home. So that $400+ billion of debt, market debt that's out there, are basically Canadians' homes, correct?
Yeah, that debt is backed against... Which is
backed against the security of their house.
It's backed against mortgages, yeah, exactly. Yes. So there's asset behind that.
Yeah. So people sitting at home tonight, well, they pontificate about this number. Literally half of that number is the assets that the greatest single asset that every single Canadian family has, which is their house. Correct, sir?
It's true. It's back against assets.
Yes, it's totally true, Pierre. It's totally true. CMHC debt is basically was created in the 1940s to allow Canadians to encourage home ownership. Okay? Market debt includes CMHC debt. Correct, sir?
Correct.
Thank you. Would you like to continue, Pierre?
Thank you.
No, you can stop now. It's not your time.
For another
sorry,
question
he offered me to take his time. I'm just taking him up on that.
No, he didn't.
You got to be careful how you word your questions.
Pierre.
Like.
We understand that, and hopefully most times it's not very substantive. My next question, Mr. Albus, in terms of the reform of the interim and main estimates, when I first came to Parliament Hill, it was even on a finance background, it was very difficult to me to discern between the budget process and then this thing called estimates. And we've undertaken, and it goes back to the comment from Mr. Moreau on transparency. I believe we've improved it considerably, and our government has put forward. So can someone provide some feedback on that line in terms of how the estimates process for MPs, including myself and for other people that will sit here and have the privilege of sitting here in the years to come, how we've improved that process for MPs, please.
So earlier when I was asked on how did it impact our current process, I kind of only addressed the interim side. I didn't address the main side. So the fact that we'll be producing the mains later in the process will make the information in those mains more up to date. So more, it will have the budget information somewhat in it. Obviously, there will be some funding that we'll have to do after, but it will contain more up-to-date information, which will improve the transparency.
Thank you very much. Do I have time for?
You got time for one more.
Final comment for I believe it's for Mr. Leswick. In terms of our debt to GDP ratio, we're on a declining trend, if I ascertain that, and on a percentage of GDP basis, how do we rank against the other G7 countries, including our principal trading partner, the United States?
Well, I mean, just to repeat the message the minister conveyed is that we have the lowest net debt GDP ratio on this internationally comparable standard in the G7.
And our credit rating is?
Yeah, it's AAA with a stable outlook.
Countries in the world have a AAA rating?
I think there's a handful.
Less than probably 5, maybe Australia, Germany. I'm
no,
sure.
Australia, not with a stable outlook. There's a few more AAAs, but with a stable outlook, it's just about a handful. I think like Liechtenstein and some other.
And I believe most of the rating agencies, have opined on our finances in the recent past and reaffirmed our ratings, if I'm not mistaken.
Like I said, stable outlook, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Who wants in? Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Dussault. Okay, just before I turn to them, look, governments. I mean, I hear that we seem to slip money on infrastructure spends. In that it isn't the spending that's planned doesn't happen, which is really kind of sad because that creates economic growth too. How is that accounted for, and where are we at on the spending on infrastructure? What we plan to do, and where we are currently at. Mr. Bottom.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm looking for the reference in the text.
Okay.
I want to make sure I give you the right numbers.
All right. Because it is, it's partly because it's negotiation with the provinces and communities, but we predict certain spending and we never seem to get it spent. That happened with the previous government, it happened with the previous government, and it's happening with this one. So how's that accounted for?
They're the same size text. So in the last budget, the government provided a reconciliation of spending through infrastructure programs, both those which are referred to as legacy programs, so that predate the current government, and in some cases predate the previous government, as well as programs introduced by the current government in the first phase of the infrastructure plan. So that was in budget 2016. And then in budget 2017. I'm just trying to find what might be the best expression of that on an aggregate basis. If I look at the legacy program, so pre-2016, there's funding that has been moved from previous fiscal year, the coming, and the subsequent into future years. So why in that case? And those programs are old enough that it really has to do with projects that were planned to go ahead and didn't. And those funds have been allocated to new projects that are brought forward by municipalities and provinces.
Okay, Mr. Poilievre and then Mr. Dussault, and we'll wrap it up.
So, Mr. Sorbera made the mistake of confusing the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation for a mortgage lender. It's not a mortgage lender, it's a mortgage insurer. So the Canadian people don't owe the money for their houses to the Government of Canada. As he had stated, they owe it to lenders for whom sometimes the insurer is CMHC, And there is a corresponding liability with that insurance, in that if there is a mortgage default loss, that loss goes to CMHC. And so there are certainly billions of dollars in the coffers of CMHC to protect against those losses. But that is distinct from believing, as Mr. Sobera apparently does, that Canadians will be paying CMHC mortgage payments, with the exception of about $75 billion of mortgages that the government of Canada, that the CMHC purchased during the financial crisis in late 2008. That is not something that CMHC does. That being said, I am glad that he highlighted CMHC, because we, across the spectrum, financial experts agree that we have overpriced housing in very large markets across this country, particularly Toronto and Vancouver. That is a major risk, particularly as interest rates rise. And the ability of Canada to withstand a significant rise in interest rates and the consequential reduction in housing prices in those markets is really at question. It's the kind of risk that should lead us now, while times are good in the world economy, to store away our financial resources rather than building up debt that future generations will have to withstand. So I wonder if the assembled witnesses are interested in commenting on risks that are associated with Canada's high level of debt, personal debt, and the inordinately high housing prices in major Canadian markets.
Anybody want to comment, or can anybody? Go ahead, Mr. Leswick.
Well, I mean, I guess some of the regional housing market dynamics that have played out over the last 2 years are definitely something that we're monitoring very closely at the Department of Finance. I think you've seen the government take action in terms of its measures that is put in place in 2016 in terms of increasing the down payment requirement, and working with partners such as OSFI in implementing the most recent stress test on uninsured mortgages. Because I think, price inflation and I mean, namely Vancouver and Toronto markets has been just like pretty high. And it goes without saying that I think we anticipate, some moderation or correction in those markets for two reasons. One is we just want to make sure that those markets can maintain a resiliency and they don't just get so overheated that we can't pull them back. And two, that behind these high house prices are interested new entrants into the housing market. So we have to make sure that we straddle this financial stability and housing affordability issue.
Mr. Duce.
One more question.
Very, very short, because we got to get the last question.
We learned that the government is going, for the estimates to fund this budget, the government is going to seek what's called a central vote for about $7 billion worth of spending. Typically, when governments seek authorization, they do it on an item-by-item basis, a department and agency by department and agency, meaning that the money has to go where it was voted. Will this central vote specifically and legally commit the government to spend the $7 billion in amounts set out in the budget on the agencies and departments for which they are set out? Or will the Treasury Board have the ability to move that money across agencies and departments?
Yeah, very respectfully, I think it's probably better that TBS officials, when the main estimates are ultimately tabled, speak to the construct and engineering around that central vote.
We know one question Pierre is going to ask the Treasury Board. Mr. Dussault, last question.
Très rapidement, concernant du temps, je veux juste...
Quickly then, I would like to ask you whether in this budget 2018, in the income that the government is counting on making for the revenue of individuals, it got 6% higher, so that's about $10 billion more, but company income down about 2%, nearly 2% less. Between 17-18 and 18-19, this is revenue from corporate taxes. So how can we explain that if our economy is doing so well, there's with growth, that corporations, I suppose, are doing well in such a situation. Why is there less taxes being taken from corporations, less income?
It's not that there's less taxes, it's just that there's less taxes than anticipated at the time of the fall update. So there's a pullback in the forecast. And part of that is just that corporate profits haven't quite played out in terms of the profit track as we thought it did in the fall. And likewise, this is usually the time of year where we get to call a number of corporations, namely banks and large resource companies, just to get an understanding of how they're going to treat their 2017 tax returns in terms, more specifically in terms of how they're going to carry forward or carry back losses. The corporate tax regime in Canada is very difficult because we have very generous ability to take losses and apply them against previous years' taxable income or carry them forward into future years. Thus, forecasting corporate income taxes is incredibly difficult. So between those two factors, just the corporate profit track change between the fall update and the budget and the anticipation of how the losses will be treated in the corporate sector are what gave rise to the revision in Budget 2018.
We'll have to call it quits at that. Thank you very much to all the witnesses for coming forward and your answers. Meeting adjourned.